What happens when a Hollywood A-lister walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a simple conversation and instead walks straight into a confrontation that spirals far beyond anything the cameras were prepared for? What you're about to hear is a breakdown of the on-air moment that left the studio stunned, viewers arguing online, and Matt Damon stepping away from the view set while Joy Behar struggled to regain control of the broadcast. This wasn't your usual celebrity Q&A. This was a clash of viewpoints, emotions, and boundaries unfolding in real time, a reminder of how quickly a planned interview can turn into a tense exchange. Before everything went sideways, the setup seemed harmless enough. Matt Damon had been invited to talk about a new environmental documentary he'd spent years developing, a project he'd poured time, money, and passion into. He walked onto the stage with the calm confidence of someone who has done hundreds of press tours, greeting the familiar round table of hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin. Their smiles were warm, their questions ready. But Joy Behar's energy? Completely different. From the second the segment began, her posture was sharper, her tone tighter. She didn't ease into her first question, she launched it like a challenge. Instead of the usual soft start about the film, she pressed Damon with a pointed remark about public figures, environmental messaging, and whether celebrities should be held to the same standards they promote. The room shifted. Even viewers noticed it. Matt tried to answer with measured calm, acknowledging the question and steering back toward the documentary's message. But it only took seconds to realize that this conversation wasn't going to follow the usual talk show script. With Joy pushing harder and the other host shifting uncomfortably, the tension grew, and the interview's tone changed before anyone could stop it. This was the spark that lit the entire confrontation. What happened next didn't just raise eyebrows, it changed the entire temperature of the room. As the cameras kept rolling, Joy Behar leaned forward with a tone that felt less like an interview and more like an interrogation. She didn't waste time circling the topic. Instead, she questioned whether Matt Damon's lifestyle aligned with the environmental causes he publicly supported. It wasn't a gentle inquiry either. It was sharp, direct, and delivered with a level of intensity that caught both Damon and the audience off guard. The other hosts reacted immediately, not with words, but with their body language. Sarah shifted in her seat. Alyssa's expression tightened. Even Whoopi raised her brows as if she knew the segment had suddenly veered off the rails. Matt handled the moment with steady composure. He acknowledged the concern and explained that he had invested heavily in sustainable systems at his properties. He emphasized that the documentary itself explored these very criticisms, how perfection shouldn't stop progress, how individual efforts can exist alongside systemic change. But Joy wasn't finished. She countered with another pointed remark, this time raising concerns about public expectations versus celebrity behavior. Her delivery wasn't subtle. She questioned whether the public should accept environmental advocacy from someone in Damon's position, pushing the idea that people deserved transparency, even accountability. The air inside the studio seemed to tighten. Every viewer at home could sense it. Whoopi attempted a gentle redirect, trying to bring the focus back to the film. It was the kind of smooth save that usually works on live TV, but Joy waved it off, determined to continue the line of questioning. And this was the exact moment when it became clear. This wasn't an accidental tough question. This was the beginning of a confrontation. What started as a simple interview was turning into a clash neither side had expected, and the tension was only getting started.
From the moment Joy dismissed Whoopi's attempt to steer the conversation back on track, the atmosphere shifted from uncomfortable to unmistakably confrontational. Joy leaned in again, this time with an edge that no one could ignore. She pressed Matt with a tougher angle, questioning whether public figures who speak about the environment should hold themselves to stricter standards. The way she framed it didn't feel like curiosity. It felt personal. The studio audience reacted with a quiet ripple, a mixture of surprise and unease. It wasn't often that a guest on a daytime talk show faced such a direct challenge only minutes into a segment. Matt stayed calm, answering thoughtfully. He spoke about the importance of progress over perfection, about the value of encouraging people to take steps in the right direction rather than shutting down the conversation by demanding flawless lifestyles. He even emphasized that the documentary highlighted voices from all backgrounds, not just celebrities. But Joy didn't slow down. Her next comment landed even harder. She questioned whether the entertainment industry often sends mixed messages, encouraging individual responsibility while benefiting from large-scale productions that also carry environmental impact. It was a broader statement, but the way she delivered it made it clear it was aimed squarely at Matt. At the table, the other hosts were visibly uneasy. Sarah shifted again, glancing toward the producers. Alyssa looked like she wanted to speak, but hesitated. Whoopi gave a small sigh, the kind that says, "Here we go." And Matt could feel the pressure rising. He responded with patience, reminding Joy that meaningful change requires both personal action and structural solutions. His tone stayed respectful, even as the questions became increasingly pointed. He tried to bring the conversation back to the purpose of his visit, the documentary, the communities highlighted, and the message of hope behind it. But Joy wasn't done. Not even close. This was no longer a tough interview. This was the start of a showdown. By this point, the tension wasn't just noticeable. It was shaping the entire mood of the segment. What started as a debate about environmental responsibility was turning into something far more heated. Joy pressed on, raising her voice just slightly, not enough to break professionalism, but enough for viewers to feel the shift. She questioned whether wealthy public figures could ever understand what everyday families face when being asked to make eco-friendly lifestyle changes. It was a valid conversation topic, but the delivery carried a sharper tone than usual for daytime TV. The other hosts exchanged quick glances. It was the silent language of television veterans who knew an interview was edging toward risky territory. Matt, still composed, answered with a steady voice. He acknowledged his position and the privilege that came with it, but he emphasized that the documentary focused on community-level solutions, innovations, small wins, and the actions of regular people who were making meaningful progress. He reminded everyone that environmental change isn't a competition about who is the most perfect, but a collective effort. But Joy had already locked into her direction. She responded with a pointed comment about consistency, whether advocacy loses impact when the messenger lives differently than the audience. The wording wasn't explosive, but the tone made it feel like a challenge. Matt paused, just for a second, and that second said everything. He carefully answered, explaining that the issue is far more complex than a single-word response could capture. He explained that the goal isn't perfection, but progress, and that expecting flawless behavior from anyone, celebrity or not, sets the conversation back instead of pushing it forward. He reiterated that the documentary spotlighted real families making practical changes, and that the message was about community solutions, not personal purity tests. But the pause he took before speaking, that tiny hesitation, was all Joy needed to push harder. She followed with a sharper comment about accountability in the public eye, suggesting that viewers deserve clarity from people who advocate on big topics. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of someone who felt deeply about the issue and wasn't going to let it go. At the table, Sarah's discomfort showed. Alyssa looked toward the producers again. Even Whoopi, usually calm in tense interviews, lifted her hand slightly as if preparing to step in. And Matt could feel the pressure rising. He responded respectfully, but the strain was visible. The back and forth had shifted from discussion to confrontation. And that shift would set off the next, far more explosive moment. If the earlier questions caused tension, the next moment lit the fuse. As Matt finished explaining the intent behind his documentary, Joy immediately followed with a comment that carried a much sharper edge. She suggested that some public figures talk the talk, but avoid real scrutiny when challenged. The wording wasn't accusatory on paper, but her tone made it unmistakably pointed. The entire table felt it. Whoopi, sensing the rising heat, stepped in gently with a reminder that the show had brought Matt on to discuss the film's message. It was a calm attempt to reset the energy. But Joy wasn't ready to move on. She waved off the redirect with a tight smile, signaling she fully intended to keep pushing. Her next question addressed political alignment, environmental messaging, and whether public figures should be held responsible for the influence they carry. Again, the topic itself was valid, but the timing and delivery added a dose of friction no one could miss. Matt listened, jaw tightening for the first time. He kept his response measured, reiterating that environmental issues should unite people, not divide them. He emphasized that the film wasn't about politics, but about practical solutions communities were adopting. He spoke calmly, but anyone watching could see the strain behind his composure. Sarah lowered her gaze. Alyssa crossed her arms. Even the studio audience had gone silent. Joy pushed again, not louder, but firmer. She questioned whether public activism from celebrities creates unrealistic expectations for everyday people. It wasn't a personal attack, but it landed like one. Matt paused, then replied with a sharper clarity. He reminded Joy that the purpose of advocacy is to highlight progress, not shame anyone. His words were steady, but the tension underneath was unmistakable. Something had shifted for good. The conversation was no longer uncomfortable. It was volatile. And the next moment would push it past the breaking point.
Up until this point, the tension had been rising in steady waves, but what happened next sent a jolt through the entire studio. Viewers at home felt it too. It was the moment when the atmosphere shifted from heated discussion to something far more personal. The conversation had already been intense, but Joy's next remark landed with a sharpness that caught even the other hosts off guard. She questioned whether Matt's advocacy work was genuine or merely a Hollywood presentation, a phrase that came out in a tone much stronger than the words themselves. For a split second, the room froze. Whoopi's eyes widened. Sarah looked straight down at the table. Alyssa's hand went to her earpiece, likely waiting for direction from the control room. Matt's reaction was subtle, but telling. He straightened in his chair, shoulders tightening, as if bracing for the direction the conversation had suddenly taken. When he finally responded, his voice was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that comes right before someone reaches their limit. He explained that his involvement in environmental projects wasn't new, wasn't performative, and wasn't for publicity. He mentioned that his work has stretched over many years, long before climate issues were widely discussed on mainstream platforms. He kept his tone respectful, but there was a firmness underneath it that hadn't been there earlier. But Joy didn't back off. Instead, she doubled down. She questioned whether celebrities sometimes use advocacy to look good rather than to drive real change. Again, a valid discussion on its own, but framed in a way that felt directed squarely at him, not at the topic. The audience let out a low murmur. It wasn't loud, but it echoed through the studio. Matt's face tightened, the first real sign that the day's patience was wearing thin. His reply came slower this time, deliberate, steady, but edged with disappointment. He reminded Joy that questioning motives without acknowledging the work done can derail genuine conversations. And this was the exact moment the interview stopped being a disagreement and turned into a standoff.
By now, the tension wasn't building, it was overflowing. Every person at the table could feel it. The audience could feel it. And Matt Damon, who had stayed composed through every sharp question so far, was finally showing signs of frustration. Joy pressed in with another firm remark, this time framing the discussion around public responsibility. She suggested that people with large platforms should expect harder questions and more intense scrutiny. Although the statement was general, the delivery made it clear it was aimed directly at Matt. The studio felt heavier with every word. Matt took a slow breath before responding. He said he understood the importance of accountability, especially for those in the public eye. But he also pointed out that accountability works both ways. Hosts, too, have a responsibility to foster meaningful dialogue rather than turning interviews into confrontations. His tone was steady, but the edge in his voice signaled that this back and forth was wearing him down. As soon as he finished, Joy cut in again, faster this time, almost overlapping his words. She questioned whether his advocacy was undermined by the very lifestyle he lived. It wasn't shouted, it wasn't hostile, but the directness made the whole room tense up. Whoopi attempted to intervene once more, suggesting they refocus on the documentary's community stories, but Joy lifted a hand lightly, signaling she wasn't done. It was subtle, yet telling. That's when Matt's expression changed. A flicker of disbelief, then frustration. He sat back, looking directly at Joy with a calm intensity that carried more weight than raised voices ever could. He reminded her and the viewers that environmental issues require constructive conversations, not personal sparring. His words weren't aggressive, but they were firm enough that even the audience felt the shift. The silence that followed was heavy. The interview had crossed from difficult to uneasy, and now it was teetering on the edge of something irreversible, and the next moment would push it past that edge.
The moment everyone would talk about later didn't arrive with shouting. It arrived with silence, the kind that makes an entire studio forget it's on live television. After Matt finished reminding Joy of the importance of constructive dialogue, Joy paused for only a second before making her boldest statement yet. She questioned whether the public should trust environmental messaging from someone whose lifestyle, in her view, didn't mirror the choices he encouraged others to make. It wasn't the words themselves, it was the tone. Clear, direct, unfiltered. The reaction around the table was instant. Whoopi inhaled sharply, ready to step in. Sarah froze mid-blink. Alyssa looked toward the control room, as if waiting for someone to call for a commercial break. Matt sat still for a moment, and the quiet stretched long enough that even the audience didn't dare whisper. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't raised, but it carried a restrained frustration that he had held back throughout the entire segment. He told Joy he came on the show to talk about real solutions presented in his documentary, about families, schools, and communities making measurable progress. He emphasized the importance of using large platforms to highlight work that matters. Then, with unmistakable firmness, he added that turning the conversation into targeted criticism only distracts from the real issues the film was trying to address. The studio remained silent. Joy responded just as firmly, insisting that tough questions were part of the job, and that public figures shouldn't expect anything less. Her voice held conviction, but also the kind of tension that made it clear the exchange had gone well beyond normal talk show debates. And then it happened. Matt reached for his microphone pack. The gesture was small, but its meaning was unmistakable. The entire room seemed to stop. Whoopi looked stunned. Sarah whispered something under her breath. Even Joy paused, realizing the moment had shifted into something unprecedented. The breaking point had come, and once crossed, there was no going back.
The studio was silent as Matt Damon held the microphone pack in his hand. No dramatic music, no sudden shouting. Just a quiet moment that felt louder than anything said during the entire interview. Matt looked at the hosts one by one before speaking. His voice was calm, but it carried a finality that everyone in the room felt. He explained that he had come to share the stories behind his documentary. Stories about everyday people making meaningful changes. But the segment had turned into something entirely different. He emphasized again that discussing environmental solutions requires open, respectful dialogue, not exchanges that feel personal or combative. Joy started to respond, but Matt gently lifted a hand, signaling he wasn't finished. He clarified that he respected difficult questions, but there's a point where a conversation stops being productive. He believed they had reached that point. That was when the audience realized. He wasn't bluffing. He was leaving. Matt placed the microphone on the table, carefully and deliberately. The sound of the device touching the surface echoed across the suddenly still studio. The camera caught reactions from the hosts, Whoopi looking stunned, Sarah frozen in place, Alyssa staring wide-eyed at the producers. Joy's expression shifted, a mix of defiance and realization. She tried to regain control of the conversation with a final comment about accountability, but Matt was already standing. He offered a respectful nod to the other hosts, a small gesture that carried more weight than words. Then he briefly addressed viewers at home, encouraging anyone interested in environmental solutions to watch the documentary when it released. His tone was steady, clear, and unmistakably disappointed. And then he stepped off the set. The audience didn't applaud, didn't react. They simply watched, stunned, as a major Hollywood actor walked away from a live television interview. Joy remained seated, noticeably unsettled as the cameras continued rolling for a few seconds longer than usual. The energy in the room felt fractured, as if everyone needed a moment to process what had just happened. The clip would spread across social platforms within hours. The debate about what happened would last even longer. But one thing was certain: no one on set or watching would forget this moment.